It would be an understatement to say that there is a plethora of martial arts the world over. To varying degrees of formality, it can be reasonably argued that almost every culture has its own fighting system. Through dance, dueling, self-defense, or warfare, swords, knives, spears, axes, cudgels, and even bare hands and feet are tools for inflicting or simulating violence. One tool in the wide array of options available to the aspiring and practiced martial artist that is almost universal across all systems is the stick. A simple, usually straight piece of wood in varying dimensions is used to train as a weapon in and of itself, or as a safer analog for other weapon systems. The stick is among the most versatile training tools for weapon-based martial arts, as the limits of what it can represent are bound only by the imagination of the practitioner. This is especially apparent in North Africa, where over 5,000 years' worth of traditions involve the use of the stick to train for other weapons of war or to settle personal grievances, and even to carry into battle on its own. Modern Tatib's lineage is ancient, its heritage depicted on the walls of ancient Egypt as one of the three great disciplines for military training. This video will explore the history of modern Tatib and its techniques. While it is nearly impossible to determine exactly how long formalized stick fighting has been present in North Africa, there are depictions that provide clues as to the age of these arts. Consider Tatib, the full name of the art being Fan al-Nazaha wa Tatib, meaning the art of being straight and honest with a stick. The earliest known depiction of Tatib is found on the walls of the Abu Simbel necropolis in Egypt. This engraving dates back to Egypt's 5th dynasty, close to 2800 BC. It displays the three disciplines of ancient Egypt's military. These disciplines were archery, wrestling, and stick fighting. It is through these three disciplines that soldiers were prepared for battle for most of ancient Egypt's history. On the walls of the aforementioned necropolis, the four principles of Tatib are also inscribed, which form the backbone of its practice today: attacking from the rear, movement, protecting the head, and striking past the opponent's weapon. Despite the modern love affair with the iconic khopesh, it is not the most common weapon that was used in ancient Egypt. After the bow comes the axe, the mace, the spear, or the knife. These were all fairly inexpensive to produce, and the techniques and principles of Tatib would be smoothly applied to almost all of them, especially given the fact that most common soldiers were levies from the peasant class and could not afford neither armor nor formal instruction beyond the basic training given to them before they were sent off to war. Over time, as the martial use of Tatib gave way to the martial preferences of invading armies, it slowly became relegated to the common folk and became further dressed in ceremony. It went from a military exercise to a tool for social cohesion, the settlement of disputes, and eventually a performance art. The art sank further into Upper Egypt and became little more than a game played by villagers in the rural countryside. In the 1960s, the art form saw a revival as a dance and performance art on stage with the Reda dance troupe. It was there at weddings, cultural events, and as entertainment for tourists. This was the status quo until the early 2000s, when Dr. Adel Boulad began his journey across Egypt to return Tatib to its martial roots. During his research, he found that techniques never completely survived intact in one location or another. One village practiced one set of techniques, while another had its own. After several years of research and intensive study, he was able to compile the sum total of the knowledge and techniques from the various masters, formalize them, and develop a pedagogical methodology with a degree of formality not seen since the days that Tatib was taught in military training camps. He called this new rebirth modern Tatib. He also pioneered some changes to the art. Among the most notable was the opening the study of the art to women, who had been previously banned from learning or practicing the art for the length of its known history. In order to bring Tatib into the modern world, Dr. Boulad, as mentioned before, traveled through Egypt. He worked extensively with living masters and experts on Egyptian history. From his efforts came a renewed fighting system and a martial arts manual called Modern Tatib, Egyptian Baton Martial, and Festive Art. This manual encapsulates the techniques, history, and culture of Tatib for a modern audience, turning it into an accessible sport and preserving the techniques that have existed for over 5,000 years. His efforts have resulted in the successful enshrinement of Tatib in UNESCO's Intangible World Heritage List. And so was born modern Tatib. Modern Tatib is a complex martial arts system that involves ceremony, philosophy, and a developed pedagogy. Gatherings begin with a group dance called the Universe, which is used to harmonize the fighters, welcome all participants to the circle, and foster the spirit of community. Engagements are called jousts. They are most often accompanied by a percussion band led by a doumbek. They usually include the daf, tabla, and are accented with the mizmar flute. There are two kinds of jousts, codified and free. Codified jousts are fixed patterns used by the fighters to greet each other before beginning free jousting. The free joust is the actual contest between the fighters. Thrusts are forbidden, and the fighters win by touch. The targets in each engagement are the head and the body. One touch on the head or two touches on the torso result in a win. Now it's important to note that the goal is not to injure the opponent, but instead to demonstrate one's own prowess as a stick fighter. So how does this differ from what we call traditional Tatib? Well, the first is doing away with the jalabiya and turban and replacing it with a tracksuit. So usually it is black pants, a white shirt, and the red three-pointed belt. The three-pointed belt symbolizes the loincloth that would have been worn on the ancient Egyptian training grounds. Next was opening the door to women. For its known history, Tatib forbade access to women, and now in modern Tatib, women can not only practice but also teach. Also was added a 360-degree, a multiple opponent dimension to combat, allowing fighters to fight within a fixed arena, as well as testing their skills against one or more opponents. The codification of joust was also introduced. This allowed for fighters to not only practice individually, but also, no matter where they trained, to come together and harmonize in the same way. The introduction of forms was also used to help teach the basic movements, patterns, and also how to respond to different combat scenarios. The use of specific drum rhythms for different engagements was also added. This allows for fighters to be signaled by the band which form they'll be doing and which one they will be doing together or alone. And finally, a formalized tournament structure, which allows for fighters from anywhere in the world to come together, compete, and build a global community of modern Tatib practitioners. Modern Tatib's technical foundations are rooted in its four principles, which are engraved in stone at the Abu Sir necropolis in the second of four lines depicting the basics of ancient Egyptian military training. Starting with the first principle, striking from the rear serves three purposes. First, it helps to generate power in the attack. The kinetic chain, similar to a boxer's punch, begins at the legs. The entire body is engaged in the attack, adding power and reducing stress on the arms and shoulders of the fighter. Secondly, it hides the intention of the attack. When all of the strikes are coming from the same position, it is difficult to determine in the very beginning which part of the body is the immediate target of the attack. A fighter can deceive the opponent by broadcasting an attack from one direction by leaning to one side and following up an attack from the other, while still engaging the core. Thirdly, if fighting in a formation with several other comrades, chambering all strikes behind the back increases control and reduces the likelihood of the fighter, in the battlefield context, from accidentally striking his or her comrades. In the second principle, protection of the head is mandatory. The average soldier in ancient Egypt did not commonly wear head protection. Helmets were not plentiful, and even in later periods, turbans were often worn in duels or on the battlefield. This meant that the head was an especially vulnerable target to life-ending blows. In lieu of a helmet, protecting the head through a series of standard guards, such as the sadda or the khalfiyya or amamiyya positions, were used to protect the head from damage. In modern Tatib, the head is the prime target, as touching one's opponent on the head during a joust is an immediate victory. This also means that in practice, strikes are almost always followed up with a defensive posture that protects the head. The third principle is movement. This emphasizes the use of footwork as an offensive and defensive tool. When the fighter is unarmed, one of the best tools for guarding against being hit is to avoid the blow entirely and position oneself to return it in kind. On the ancient battlefield, when the lines would break down and the combat would devolve into a disorganized melee, spatial awareness, sure footing, and constant movement became as essential as the weapons in the warrior's hands. To train for this, practitioners of modern Tatib learn their footwork and develop their agility through a series of dance steps and standard forms. In the fourth principle, the focus is on the opponent and not the weapon. Essentially, if the execution of the prior three elements are strong enough, a fighter should be sufficiently protected from the opponent. The objective of the attack should be the target area on the opponent. Watching the movements of the opponent will better indicate the direction that the attack is coming from, more so than watching the weapon itself, as focusing on the weapon more than the fighter reduces the amount of time that a fighter has to react to an attack. The priority from the threat management perspective is to become the threat, pressing the opponent's focus towards defense as opposed to offense. Proper striking technique in modern Tatib is performed using a push-pull movement of the hands, similar to cutting with a katana. The bottom of the stick is held in the center of the right palm, and the left hand is positioned approximately 1.5 hands above the lower hand. This position is most ideal for controlling the stick without compromising too much of the potential power and speed. There are several exercises to assist in developing the skill. One of the most basic is to use the power and control exercise. Because modern Tatib does not make use of protective gear, practitioners must regularly practice restraint in sparring and training. The exercise normally requires 2 people, but can be done alone. Person A will take the role of the attacker, and Person B of the defender. Person B will hold the stick in one of 5 defensive positions, either the side of the torso, the clavicle, or the top of the head as examples. Person A will strike with the weapon at the target area covered by the defender. First, the sticks will make contact, then Person A repeats the attack, but stopping shy of touching the stick of Person B. For the third strike, Person B removes the stick from the guard position and exposes the target area. Person A then strikes the exposed area, but stops short of touching it. This is achieved through reversing the aforementioned push-pull to a pull-push. Concerning the forms, or tashlika, it is important to understand that each form, or tashlika, has a specific function for developing specific attributes used by a fighter in the joust. Beginners are often taught the Mosalafa 2 and Mosalafa 3 as beginning forms. The Mosalafa 2 is an exercise that teaches fighters how to return to a defensive posture after striking. This is done both stationary and in motion. Mosalafa 3 shows the fighter how to apply a variety of strikes and returning from a defensive position, such as the sada, and returning that with a strike. The point of this is to give the fighters the opportunity to feel what it is like to be in a dynamic sparring environment without the randomness of a free joust. Of the 9 main forms of modern Tatib, Nakhla is normally the one that is taught to beginners first. The Nakhla form is used to teach the basic attributes of striking, defending while moving, and applying a defensive feint into an attack. The 9 forms of modern Tatib are Nakhla, Nakta, Kantara, Galwa, Lafa, Masha, Khala, Kheda, and Shabaka. Each of these forms is designed to have specific combat extracts that can be used in a joust. As depicted here, we can see how some of the techniques from the Nakhla can be applied defensively. The Rasha, which is the circular motion of the stick above the head, is a tool for not just harmonizing with the opponent, but also to protect your head while in the middle of a free joust. This can also be used as a tool for distracting your opponent for a disarm, as pictured here. Modern Tatib also addresses the issue of learning how to defend yourself once you've fallen on your back or fallen on your stomach. This is an important skill, considering that on ancient battlefields, not every fighter was able to stay on his or her feet throughout the entire course of the combat experience. These techniques can be applied to different weapon sets. As videoed here, you can see the turning step from the modern Tatib form Nakhla applied to the spear, the shield, and the sword. Modern Tatib is an ancient martial art that carries the legacy of an ancient people. Through the rhythm of its drum, it fosters the spirit of community, respect, and friendship. Beyond the high energy of the free joust is the rhythm of the drum, the clash of sticks, the smiles, the clapping hands, and the sure joy in the shared rhythm of combat. To practice modern Tatib is to walk in the footsteps of the pharaohs. This video was prepared by the Historical African Martial Arts Association. Visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and at hamassociation.wordpress.com. A special thanks goes out to Dr. Adel Boulad and Modern Tatib for allowing us to use footage from the YouTube channel for Modern Tatib for the content for this video. Sources for this video came from Modern Tatib, Egyptian Bataille Martiale, and Festive Art, available on Budo Editions and Amazon.com. Learn more about Modern Tatib at www.tatib.com.